Thanks for the chats. And it is already second to last. It's 28th of May. This is the last May lecture here. And today is going to be tools, sprints. Well, a lot about tools, but before that, as usual, let's go over what happened with the exercise I gave you. And the exercise I gave you involved some champagne. And those of you who were, remember last time, I still got my sparkling wine here because for all of those who live in Finland probably know that this Saturday is a big celebration for the youngsters who graduated from high school, and that would be my son who is graduating. So we've got plenty of sparkling wine here. But let's see how your champagne exercises went. So I went through your answers and wanted to make a couple of points, and then I got some really excellent quotes from you, and let's go through them as well. So the beautiful clarity, that was kind of the point of the exercise, that hey, actually goals are difficult to make clear in a sense that they are understandable and doable and so forth. So the kind of that, just to remind you, and especially those who didn't do the exercise, was that, maybe you have familiar goals like this, that somebody says that, okay, our goal is the number of users that use the new features is going to rise, and new features cause no large issues to our existing users. Bit of a clunky language there, but nevertheless, you kind of go like, yeah, that looks like it could be a goal here. And of course, what we did was start putting some critical questions to this. So what do you mean? Number of users rise. So if I get one more user, that would be more than previously. So is one enough? And secondly, what do you mean by no large issues? When does an issue become large? Do we all agree what it is, what it means, and so forth? And then you kind of did these exercises, you pushed through this dumb framework, and then you probably get something like this, at least 30% of users have activated the feature, and at least 10% of users use it on a regular basis. So definitely kind of you get this kind of clarity of it. And the whole point being that how can we make these goals a little bit more clear, and especially in the context of once we reach the goal, did we actually reach it or not? Because if they're vague and ambiguous, we don't know if you have reached the goals. And I hope that one of the things you learned from this exercise was that this exercise wasn't, again, the tool is a tool. The exercise isn't necessarily about the tool, but the tool is to help you with something, to do something with it. So of course here the tool was to help make those goals doable, understandable, measurable, and beneficial on the whole. And that's of course, again, during the exercise, what you did with your pair was that you facilitated them. You started asking them at least these 4 questions, putting in the framework, and hopefully you talked a little bit more. And it looks like from the exercises and the reflections, you did definitely actually have really, really good conversations. That what does this actually mean and how do you put it into practice? Good. The other thing that popped up in your comments and reflections was actually really good thoughts about, do you know what? If we really, really go for the dumb, especially when it comes to the measurable part of it, the word oversimplifying came up a couple of times, and I thought that was super interesting. So let's look at some of the comments that you wrote. So I think this was great. One of you wrote, aiming for clear measurability. Hand create situations in which you get what you measure. That classic thing that you start measuring something, well, that's what get. Focus on specific bits can mean that the goals serve too little meaning. In addition, focus on too much doable can create lack of ambition. This is a really good point made here, and it packs a lot of into it. So kind of like, okay, if you really go into the details, you probably start losing the meaning of those goals. And if you really, really push for doability, then you might actually lose something about, the whole ambition and the focus. You just go too small and too detailed with it. Let's see what else you got. oops, I got my Zoom controls here blocking part of the text. Especially my own thinking went straight away to measurable success criteria, and the deeper desired impact could have not been found. So again, I'm going to come back to the M, the measurable part, because for some reasons it's very strong, very powerful. And when something is powerful, you can use it for good or bad in a way. So in this comment, the point was that, okay, the measurability kind of focused away from the desired impact and it became maybe more doable, more actionable, more about the actual outputs and not like the impacts. What else we got? In our exercise, we found that it was easier to set goals when the project involves only the person in question, one person. The other person's goals involved 150 people, so there are more different meanings and more complexity. Again, really good point. Sounds obvious when you write it down like that. Again, some of you had like one-person projects, and maybe the conversation was relatively simple because there was just one person involved in trying to make them dumb. But of course, if you have more and more people, 150 people, how do you make them doable for 150 people? How do you make them understandable for 150 people? And measurable 150 people? And that's, of course, the challenge. If you are an organization and you want to give shared goals and make them dumb, yeah, it's not trivial. It becomes actually a leadership challenge, I would call. What we got next? This is actually from last year, but I thought it was really, it kind of came up in your answers as well. But I just left it from last year here because somebody wrote, this dumb framework, it works for short-term planning. It's too cumbersome for long projects. And then again, another person said, well, it doesn't work for short projects. It's really good for long projects. So yeah, I mean, it's a tool. And you need to understand the tool better and the content, people have different opinions about this. But I want to continue with the comments because there was some really good stuff going on. I think these three, again, highlight some of the aspects of the exercise and the goal setting thing. So the first one is that the exercise made me think about how often people need a thinking partner more than they need answers. Again, excellent point. Remember, there's a reason why we want you to do these as pair exercises, is that you start understanding that, hey, actually, what I needed here was somebody to ask these questions because otherwise I would have done this and this and this and this. Or just simply the presence of another person makes me think differently. Second comment, together we can and should ask lots of questions to clarify how we define success and how we define our satisfaction. Yes, that's kind of the key of goal setting, isn't it? And again, imagine that you got 150 people working for you. How do you define success for all of them? How do you keep everybody more or less satisfied that this is something meaningful and, what we should be doing? But it starts like that comment says, together, having more than one person is the very first step. Third comment, can be difficult when the person isn't sure themselves what success should look like. Then it becomes more of a coaching exercise to uncover those insights together. Beautifully written. Absolutely. So again, if somebody's not quite sure, what are the goals here? Why are we doing this? Maybe they don't understand the goals. Maybe they see the benefits of the goals. Then probably somebody needs to facilitate. It becomes a coaching exercise. And now you have done it. Now you know what it feels like. You know what it looks like. Then this comment, agreement on what's beneficial could be difficult because different stakeholders may disagree on what's most valuable. Not everything meaningful is easy to quantify. Absolutely. I think this just states again nicely a fact of the world we live in. It's not unambiguous what is beneficial or what is most valuable. It probably requires a compromise. There are different people, there are different stakeholders, there are different agendas, there are different strategies. And that's leadership, isn't it? That's a leadership exercise. Who makes the decision? Who says, how do you facilitate this process that becomes a good compromise? Because you could have a bad compromise either. How do you maybe keep the ambition high although it is a compromise, rather than just kind of water it down and try to make everybody happy. Good point. And then the last one, not everything that matters is easily measurable, and not all measurable things matter. So balancing the two is tricky. This is beautiful. Whoever wrote this, I mean, just brilliant. That's the fun of this exercise, isn't it? But that's the tricky part as well, especially the measurability, where I'm going to come a little bit later. You know, if you just go for things that are easily measurable, then it becomes just like the other person wrote, maybe you lose the ambition, maybe you lose the focus. But then again, it should be somehow measurable. It should not be unambiguous either. So how do you balance them? Yeah, that's where we need people. That's where we need focus. That's where we need dialogue, reification, participation, facilitation. Everything comes in. So making those compromises, making meaningful compromises and so forth. Good. Let's see, any comments here? I'm going to give you a few seconds to get those comments. And then I'm going to make a few points about this as well. Okay, keep on. You feel free to write the comments anyway. Because the point I want to make after this exercise and after the lecture on Monday last week is that now you probably start realizing an obvious thing is that, okay, this goal setting, there's at least two perspectives into setting goals in a project, in an organization. So are we writing down these goals to communicate togetherness so that, one perspective is that these goals should be dumb so that, everybody understands them. That's what I call communication for togetherness. But there's another perspective. So the other perspective is that we're actually setting these goals not just to communicate. We're setting these goals because we want to be somewhere we are not, which is, of course, the whole point of goals, isn't it? What I call here a required state of affairs. It's that your project has goals because you want to be there. You want to have those things done. But on the other hand, there is this whole communication part. And as a facilitator, you should recognize these two and the differences. So if we take the first, or the goal, the required state of awareness, this kind of goal-setting mindset, that we are setting goals for ourselves, our project, our team, because we want something to be a fact in the future. We want 25% more users by the end of July. That's like, we want this to be a fact by the end of July. So that's kind of goal-setting mindset. And it's actually quite difficult to be sure in advance. If you have an ambitious goal, if you're doing something you have never done before, it is almost by definition foggy. It's difficult to be extremely measurable. And therefore, it can be complex, can be vague, it can be uncertain. And this whole goal-setting mindset is kind of like, okay, let's put this goal over here. So it kind of becomes like a law carved in stone. We need 25% increase by the end of July. This becomes our mantra. It becomes our dogma. It becomes the thing we're all aiming at. And in this world, complex goals, complex objectives are okay. We want to achieve difficult things. We want to achieve things that we can't perhaps, communicate really well. And if we start changing these objectives, then it kind of misses the whole point. We want that objective to be stable, that we can actually focus on it for a longer term. Then what about the other mindset? What I call the communication mindset. It's a bit different. So in this communication mindset, when you're setting goals, you're really trying to make sure that everybody understands them. All the stakeholders, all the participants, all the 150 people. You have the reification, participation process, listening people, having a dialogue, revising the goals. Maybe you're setting a vision that we can all navigate towards, let's go over there. But, maybe we change it a little bit as time goes by. It should be understandable and kind of evolves dynamically. And the whole complex objectives, well, it becomes terrible. If you give an objective that's very complex, is it really doable? Did everybody understand it? How do you measure it? Does it really benefit us? So in this communication mindset, clarity is king. And the kind of changing those objectives is the whole point, because like I said, and we've been saying in this course, is that, dialogue is so very important. We should listen to people. We should be able to change those goals. But this is just another way of looking that actually this goal setting is much, much more than just setting goals or writing down objectives for projects or teams. And as a facilitator, you probably should recognize this and maybe ask this. Make it, before you start anything big, just like the speech bubble says, as your facilitator, I would like to clarify kind of process thing. Are we setting these goals for communication? Or are we setting these goals as something we want to achieve? Or are we somehow trying to get them both? Because they're like the previous slide showed, they can be a bit contradictory. Communication mindset wants the goals to be dumb and clear, but the kind of goal setting mindset might go for, goals that are very complex and ambiguous. Facilitation needed, dialogue needed. That's probably the answer to everything here. So it is actually the M that I point my fingers really at. The measurability of a good goal. That's the difficult part. I would say the D, U, and the B are relatively easy. I'm not saying they're easy or always, but the M is difficult. And if you really think about it, it is because this measurability actually is asking a lot. And the measurability is difficult because it requires change. Because probably it requires change in the processes on how the organization works or how the team works or how individuals work. It might change how people think, might change their attitudes, the attitude that, hey, I might be wrong. If I'm your boss, am I okay with the thought that I, show everybody that I might be wrong? Maybe it requires change in the decision-making processes, practices. Maybe it requires change in the technical infrastructure. If you really, really want to measure this, how do you get the data? Where do you get the data? Changing the objectives, changing power relations. No longer it is that the big boss knows the best. If we try to really make this objectively measurable, have you ever been in a situation where the data shows something and then maybe, a powerful person says that, no, this is what we should do, and it's a bit contradictory. So that's a lot of that, at least in this list, there's 7, I think, strong reasons that you would actually skip the metrics. You would skip the measurability because it's outside many, many comfort zones. It is probably pushing you towards root problems, which brings me to the next slide. Oops, that was 2 slides. That even if when you start asking these measurability questions, again, just like a facilitator, just like, a physical therapist for organizations, then you might keep your eyes and ears open because now you're getting to the root causes that are making change difficult, such as accountability, such as people being afraid of being wrong, such as how much do we believe in data and how much do we believe in gut feelings, or do we actually get the data anywhere, or how much we want room for interpretation here. Do we want a lot or do we want none? And these might be actually difficult for the organization. So it's not the goals necessarily. It's not the tool, but doing this process of dumb, you might actually hit a nerve and start finding some really deep root causes that are stopping the change or stopping your success in a project. So like the speech bubble says, it's actually the M, the measurability becomes a tool for better goals. The measurability isn't necessarily a goal in itself. What I mean by that is that go and push for the measurability But at the end of the exercise, maybe just forget the measurability, but be quite aware and sensible about the things that start popping up when you're asking for measurability. That was the big point I wanted to make here. And again, simple tool. The power of simple tools is that they're so simple that you can actually easily go into deeper and deeper root causes in the organization, in people's minds, and so forth. But one more thing I want to add is this, that kind of like the goals, they can be for communication, they can be for actually goal setting, but let's be realistic. We still have a lot of organizations where goals are to make micromanagement easier. So the whole measurability might become a tool for the management to keep control and oversight of what people are doing. And I'm not saying it's that good or bad. Sometimes might be good. You need to keep an oversight. Might need to control people for some situations. But in some situations, no, that's not necessarily what you want. Too much control and too much oversight might kill creativity and so forth. So again, this measurability is a powerful thing and can be used to, micromanage and control people as well. So that was exercise 3 from last Monday. And like I said, Jari will go over the reflections and learnings from the exercise 4 that he gave you last week. So we're not going to go into that. Moving on. This week's topic. Oh, before that, I looked at the attendance forms, and I really appreciate some of you wrote things about comments and all of those things. And some of them are asking for case studies and more details or concrete examples. And yeah, we try to do that, but this is actually a very short course, so we can't cover everything, sorry. But we're trying to kind of focus on things that are applicable to almost anywhere, just like the thing I talked about previously. Anyway, let's go to the tools a little bit. Let's have a really look at the tools. Like I said, the goal is the thing, the dumb is the tool from last week's exercise. So what about tools as culture creating objects? Now, what do I mean by this? We go all the way back to lecture 1, where I talked about uncertainty. We can't know everything, but we need to drive forward. In the uncertain world, we talked about, digital is a way of working. There's a lot of organizations that want to change the work culture. We need to change it by doing. And the point number 4, we change doing by tools and structures, which is actually echoing quite a lot this John Shook model we went over. That if you want to change an organization culture, the way of doing, and the whole organization, you start from the factory floor on changing people's behavior to change their thinking, which brought us into this chart where we're having uncertainty and we want competitive advantage. And then uncertainty, we want a responsive culture of doing routines, and it kind of boils down to these individual tools and routines and practices. And once people start using them, we get, concrete behavior, tangibility, shared thinking, shared values, and the holy grail of autonomous, responsive, shared culture. And I would say nowadays, with more and more automation and artificial intelligence, there's more and more we human beings need to deal with the unknown stuff. In other words, whether we're a big boss, small boss, not a boss at all, we need to start making decisions with limited knowledge, limited time, and try to get different, diverse perspectives into account as much as possible, because we believe that that's the way to make good quality decisions. So actually, I believe and has happened in the past decade or so, we need more and more of these tools to help us to make summaries, synthesis, grouping, shared frameworks, different kind of checklists, templates for argumentation, templates for having a good quality discussions, templates or models for having good dialogue. And ultimately, because we want to make well-grounded, inclusive, good and clear decisions. That's how organizations work. People make decisions. Things happen. Change happens. Somebody makes decisions. And that's, I would say, in the past years, I'm not sure about you, maybe you can list in the chat your favorite tool about this, but there's many out there. Kanban boards I've mentioned, Eisenhower's matrix, well, that's what is it, like 70 years old, 80 years old tool. Lean canvas, good old Moscow. OKRs are very popular here in the Nordics nowadays. And then the dumb one that you used last week. And like I made the point before, I believe that all of these tools are there to clarify decision making. And it actually boils down to these two questions. How can individual people, individual teams figure out what is valuable work and what is valued in general? Good. So the tools, frameworks, canvases, key components for change. So brings me to the main point of today. What about those tools? Maybe as a medicine for organizational headaches. That's what I talked previously. Tools as facilitation, something we have made you do during these exercises. And now coming back to lecture number 1, these tools as culture building objects. That these tools are like Lego blocks that you kind of put into the organization and they start kind of building certain type of culture, the V model I just went through. So tools are much more than tools, of course. So before we go to tools, let's call the midwife as a mindset, as a perspective, or could be the facilitator, but that's the name of the TV series, called The Midwife, so I couldn't resist. I put it here. But there's a point here, this kind of what I call a midwife perspective, is that, a midwife is the professional there at childbirth who's not giving the birth, who's not actually delivering the baby, but they have a very crucial role in delivering the baby and making everybody happy and healthy. So the whole point, which kind of fits nicely with the facilitator mindset, is that you're helping others to succeed and it is not your baby. So kind of facilitator as a midwife. But wait, you might be going and, hey, I'm not an external facilitator. I am the boss. Or maybe you go like, I'm a team member. I'm part of the team. I'm not an external one. Or maybe you're the product owner. How can I be an external midwife because I'm the product owner? Well, maybe you as the boss or the PO, what if you have this mindset? This is kind of, nowadays a lot of people have this servant leadership mindset that it's not about you. It's actually helping others to succeed. So this midwifery as a mindset as well. What if it's all about, as a leader, helping the others reach their goals and so forth? So that's the mindset. Step number 1 as the midwife. Know your toolbox and methods. So a little bit about the tools and methods and not just use them as a zombie, as a brainless zombie and just take a tool and use it without understanding what is it as a cultural building block. What kind of values does this tool embed? And it's like I said, perhaps previously in the first or second lecture, the tools actually embed a lot of values. They actually embed some attitudes in them. They look like innocent tools, just like a business model canvas or a lean canvas. It's actually just rich with certain values. It's rich with kind of embedded behavior. And you better to know these, the better you understand the tools. So what I got here is kind of 4 different angles. I'm going to go one by one before the break about tools. So tools are not just for doing things. Of course, that's what you kind of think that, hey, I got a tool, maybe I got a hammer, or I got a bunch of bicycle tools here. But of course, they are about doing. They're getting some specific work done. But you should be mindful, aware that these tools have at least these 4 dimensions as well, or 3 addition to the doing. Communication dimension, research dimension, engagement dimension, and then getting things done. And what I mean by this is this. Let's take the first one. The tools have this communication value in them, or communication perspective, if you will. Because maybe the tool, in addition to getting things done, actually helps you to sell the idea, whether it's a customer, whether it's a boss, maybe it's a steering group. Maybe it helps you to communicate certain decisions, helps you to make an argument. Maybe it clarifies complex things, just like the dumb tool. It definitely has a very strong communication dimension in it. Or maybe it's just there to bring order into chaos, to make ambiguous things more unambiguous. So customer journey, if some of these are tools, service blueprints, business model canvas, it definitely has a very strong communication aspect to it. So if you're looking at a tool and wondering, does this have a communication dimension, then a sparring question would be like, if I was alone, would I use this tool? Because if I'm working alone and there's nobody here, I don't need to communicate, do I? So would I actually use this tool? If not, then maybe it's not so strong with communication. So that was one. Tools are also for communication. Second, tools are actually for creating new knowledge, not just getting things done, but actually accumulating knowledge and learning. So maybe the tool is there to gather and analyze data. Maybe it's there for you and the team to learn new ways of working. Maybe it's pushing you towards certain behavior, certain way of doing things. Maybe it is there to grasp the current situation and the context, like the onion, context onion, the very first exercise we did. That was actually, it was a tool to explain the organization, but it was also a tool for you to learn about how do I see this organization? So basically, tools like interviewing techniques, shadowing, data analysis, competition analysis, all of these are actually a lot about, kind of sounds obvious for researching and learning as well. And the sparring question I put here, just if I knew enough, would I use this tool? If you knew enough, then maybe not this tool. So it means has a lot of research. Then the third one, which is quite obvious, but really good to be aware of, is these tools are for engaging people. Tools are for, bringing people into the project, helping them to give their contribution to the project, getting their opinions and all that stuff. Ensuring those diverse perspectives. If you want a good decision made or if you want your result to be good, you probably should look at it from all the different angles needed. And commitment and ownership, the last one over there. That whatever the tool does, maybe this tool is actually really good for getting people to commit to this project, to commit to these goals. So brainstorming, for example, I guess more or less everybody knows brainstorming, so have done some kind of a brainstorming. It's actually really good at getting people's opinions, of course, but it's actually good at engaging people. Whatever you do with those ideas after the thing, you're engaging people. You can bring new people, and then they feel at least a little bit ownership to the project. So it's actually really good at that. I would go as far as say that brainstorming is not actually really good at idea generation. There's much better ways of doing it, but it's really good at engaging people. Again, if all my coworkers were machines, would I use this? If all your coworkers were, AI, would you use brainstorming? Probably not, because you don't need to engage them. They're very engaged. And then, of course, lastly, tools are for doing. Yeah, you actually do things. You get things done with them. It takes the project forward. Maybe the tool helps you, divide the phases into meaningful parts. Maybe it's a checklist for quality, checklist for safety, checklist for different viewpoints. So prototypes, prototyping, experiments, mood boards, all of these things, and a business model canvas. So kind of maybe the sparring question here would be that if I had to give a presentation, would I use this tool? That this tool is actually really good at doing things. It's not really good at communicating, for example. So to summarize and to give you an idea, the tool as a culture building object is to remember that this tool is, yes, for doing, but actually if I introduce this tool, I'm actually introducing this type of communication or this, I'm introducing that we should engage people more, or we are introducing that, hey, gathering knowledge, learning, everything that researching, this is you see that when the tools bring certain values in them, and if you're forcing people or asking people to use these tools, then you're kind of introducing these things into the culture, into the organization as well. Good. That was kind of step one. Step two. Step one was to learn the tools, and then how to help others to use the tools, how the midwife mindset in practice. So for the last 10 minutes, going to give you a few examples. So this is the difference between helping other people, just like a midwife is helping the mother to give birth or the parents to deliver the baby together. It's a bit of a different mindset. You really need to start understanding what's difficult about this tool or what's so difficult about these things. Or are you actually the person who has to get things done? And kind of my experience, what I'm putting here now in just a few slides comes from doing this for, almost for ages now, for a couple of decades. So a lot of projects, a lot of professionals coached, organizations design and everything. So I'm really kind of putting here my practical knowledge of doing these things for over a decade and then putting them into books and everything and tools, building a couple of tools myself. And I think, so I guess what I'm saying that I'm not now referring to any academic studies, but I'm really just bringing my experience here. And I think three things are actually something to pay attention to when you have the midwife mindset. So how do you help other people to come up with good strategic answers? How do you help other people to see the customer perspective? How do you help other people to come up with good ideas? So let's start with the strategic thinking. So giving birth to clear objectives. Yes, it's very much about goal setting and clear objectives. And we did that just last week. So the thing I have learned that I think is super, that answering strategic questions is actually difficult. If you start asking people, so what's the strategy of this team? Or, what's your strategy for this and that? Giving an answer is difficult. But when you ask people to write them down, whether it's a post-it or, just a short piece of text, that's even more difficult. Which also means, A, you need to give people some time. B, once they do it, it can be very, very valuable. What is our objective here? How does it link to the strategy? People can explain it, but ask them to write it down. And as a facilitator, just to get this basic thing, whether it's a goal setting or describing a strategy, is help them to balance the answers, that it's not too broad, just intangibly broad, embracing the whole world, and not too specific either. So how do you help them to balance that it's somewhere in the middle? As a facilitator, you should probably have some examples to give. Last week, remember we had this team and they did this and this and this. Or what I've done with a lot of students is that rather than tell them what to do, I tell what other students have done with their careers or theses and just give people examples and they go like, okay, so it kind of looks like that. And another trick as a facilitator, of course, is listening to people and then kind of summarizing it back. Going like, so what you're saying is that your team strategy is this and this and this. And that it becomes a dialogue. So your role as a facilitator is to listen, package it, give it back to them, and start iterating that. How do you put it into words and so forth. And of course, role playing is always fun. So you could just go as a facilitator that, hey, let's imagine I'm the chief financial officer and I'm really interested where you're going to spend the company money. So how would you explain your strategy to the CFO, for example? And the other thing I want to really about these strategic answers to highlight is accountability. It's easy to give answers. Somebody asks you, they give an answer. Maybe they ask you to write it down. Well, you write it down. But how do you make people accountable for those answers? So they're not just answering so that they can get away from the situation. Or maybe they just go, this is just an exercise. We're in this training. We don't really have to think about the answer. We just write down somewhere and the teacher is happy. And or maybe just go, well, no, this is not how we do things here. I can give you an answer, but that's not how things are done. So of course, the accountability happens when you actually have more and more realism in it. Real people, real bosses, real customers. So, maybe you're asking somebody to explain the strategy and you go like, hey, you know what? In 5 minutes, it is the CFO coming. Literally, the CFO is coming. And they, have to be a little bit more accountable what they said. Or maybe they're saying that our customers would like this and that. And then you kind of bring in the real people, real customers. Okay, let's see. What do the customers say? Or maybe you just simply put people to sign their name under these things. Maybe you have a lot of post-its on a wall, and then you go like, okay, now everybody sign your name underneath, and I'm going to take a picture. And it has your name on it. It's a small little party trick, but actually then people go like, okay, am I going to sign these literally? And that's accountability again. And last but not least, and I'm hoping Shelly is here again because I made you do this quite a lot. You're presenting the results in public to your colleagues or the whole company. And that puts a lot of social pressure on the accountability of what you just did, for good or bad. Second point, facilitating the customer perspective. This is kind of the basic design challenge. How do you help people to be empathetic and see all the diversity that we as human beings have? And again, let's start with the fact that seeing the world from another person's perspective is not easy for us human beings. Let's take it as a starting point. So empathy is kind of difficult, you know. The more and more you're distanced from the other person, it's really difficult to role play. How does the world look from their perspective? Whether they're different age, whether they're different culture, whether they have different social backgrounds. Yeah, it is difficult. But a couple of tricks that might be obvious here is just to want to highlight is that typically when we talk about, let's say, designing something for our customers or clients, let's make a division between the rational and the emotional. And people are probably easier to think about the rational. What does the rational customer think? And let's have them write down. Once you have written down the rational stuff, you can now start, there's room to start talking, what about the emotional stuff? Yeah. Let's put it in the rational basket. But let's think about the emotional. So maybe that is the first division of how do you help people to be more empathetic. And another similar thing to do and facilitate is to kind of the scope. What does the world look like from the other person's perspective? What does their day look like? What is their daily life like? Let's start looking at it and planning at it. And then maybe we zoom out and like, okay, what does their life look like in a year's perspective, 2 years? What are their aspirations, their long-term strategies and so forth. And last but not least, make it real. Bring a real person. Make them go and visit real people. Reality is a fantastic thing in facilitation. Try to make it real as possible. And then a couple of more things about this is that typically people go like, I've been in this situation. I'm not sure if you have been. It's like, well, that only works in the B2C. It only works in the consumer business. Here in the B2B, we don't have to think about value propositions. We don't have to do personas. And that's absolutely wrong, of course, because in B2B business, you can be much, much more face-to-face and much more human-centric than in some parts of consumer business. In some B2B businesses, emotions matter much, much more in some consumer. So it's not about whether you're B2B or B2C. It's actually much more about what is your business model, how many customers you have, who are the stakeholders and all of these things. And salespeople are good at this. In a B2B organization or B2B business, salespeople get it. They are the experts about what do we need to know and how about the customers. So really good resource, and hats off to anybody if there are salespeople listening. But also be mindful of some of the allergies. People get bumps and they get sore throats or whatever allergic reaction to some things like too much design thinking or something like that. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, one more before the break. Ideas and concepting. So this is sometimes kind of the holy grail that you get these ideas or you get a concept or a solution to the problem. And my kind of quick points about this is to, rather than go for ideas, we all want good ideas, great ideas, fantastic ideas. We're trying to look for great ideas. I think it's a little bit wasteful because I think actually value propositions are much more focused. So rather than, ideas can be anything. Idea can be a small detail. It can be a huge, big thing. And ideas at the end of the day, they're just only vehicles for communication and engagement, I would say. But value proposition, and there in the corner, I got value proposition canvas, which is a really powerful tool because value proposition really emphasizes the relationship between the customers and the products and services you're doing. So whether you're doing a new recruitment process or you're doing a new physical product for customers, this really helps that rather than coming up with ideas, you're coming up with value propositions. So what is the value proposition? What is the relationship? So I just kind of my tip that this is much more powerful rather than just having general ideas. And another powerful tool is the customer journey. I'm going to skip these bullets, but you get the slides. The customer journey as a conversion funnel. So how do people become your customers? What's the sales process like? What's the acquisition process like? This is a very good way of, rather than talking about ideas, or maybe you can start with ideas, but pretty quickly go to the customer journey. And also a customer journey as an experience mapping. So how do the customers work now? So, maybe if you take a trip to Italy, what is the actual journey for you like? Where do you start? Where do you get the tickets? What do you feel at different moments? What do you feel after the trip? And all of these kind of experience mapping. Again, much more powerful than just having ideas of what to do with people. And lastly, I would say that the business model canvas, it is actually very good. Rather than, just having ideas, you can start with ideas. I'm not saying that's bad because you probably need to engage people. You need to communicate people. You need maybe it's just raw material to work with. So, go for ideas, go for brainstorming, but pretty quickly choose maybe some of these tools, a value proposition canvas or a customer journey or a business model, or even better, use them all just to get more focused on the actual thing that we should be doing. And like I said earlier, now you can be much more mindful, but okay, this tool has a very strong communication aspect, or this tool is actually really good at gathering research about our customers and so forth. The point I want to make about the business model canvas here is that it's always a good question to ask. Who's paying what? And even if you're not a business, if you're a non-profit, you need to cover costs. There need to be probably some transactions of money to keep your organization up and running. And we are coming up with different ideas, whether it's an internal process, a new service for your customers. It's always a good exercise to go and like, okay, where does the money flow in this? Who's going to cover the costs? Are there any revenues and so forth? Great. That was part one. And we are 2 minutes over time, but that's not a problem. We're going to have our 5-minute break now, if you don't mind. If you have any questions or comments, you can write them during the break, or maybe just go and have a break. We're going to continue 8 minutes past the hour. So that's breakout room time. Breakout room. I try to make a funny dad joke out of this. I hope you all enjoy it. But what actually I'm asking you to do is everything I talked about the first half, about tools, methods, and ways of working. So think about a context you're familiar with. Maybe your workplace, maybe it's your hobby, maybe it's your schoolwork at the university. And maybe you have tried to introduce a new tool, new way of working, or something else similar to this, that they're trying to introduce something. What kind of experience was it? Your thoughts on this based on everything I said. Remember different event, communication angle, engaging people angle, what kind of things you bumped into it. Perhaps, it doesn't have to be as good comment as Hugo you put it there, or Jalmari's comment, but just, share in the breakout room different stories and thoughts about this. How easy, what are your experiences, your thoughts of introducing new tools, methods, and ways of working? And we're going to have roughly 15 minutes. And when you get back, you know how it works. One of you hopefully gives a quick summary in the chat, and we will see how it goes. And then after the exercise, I'm going to give you an example. Okay, Jaakko, are we ready to rock?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see if I can see the breakout rooms. First comments. There we go, Maria. Well done. That was fast. Let's see. And now we get a lot of comments, of course. Understanding the reasoning behind the tools helps implement them. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. I guess what I said today, it is obvious, but the thing about obvious things is that you should probably say them aloud as a facilitator in the beginning. Just stating the obvious. Never went wrong stating the obvious. Open dialogue regarding tools prior to using a tool supports more efficient use of the tool. Absolutely, yeah. And then again, some of the tools, people might have different views on it. What's the kind of the point of them and why they are using them. So maybe that's again another kind of to spend maybe a minute or two before just making sure that we're all on the same page. Let's see, what else you got? Tools don't substitute for own thinking. Yeah, that's a good point. They should facilitate your own thinking and not just substitute. Culture and attitude has an impact on the motivation, yeah, adaptation of new tools. And again, kind of stating the obvious, and I'm getting it from your comments. If you're introducing a new tool, then you're asking people's cognitive resources and energy. So you should maybe factor that in. Are we using the tool, learning how to use it? Bigger companies take tools more easily to use different tools for different purposes, trainings to all that. Difficult when people have to do a lot of work or learn a lot to implement the change. How can we make it easy as possible? Yes, kind of the whole cognitive load, maybe it's emotional load. All of these things are maybe traditionally not that much discussed when people are at the workplace, but these are the things that are sucking energy from us. Motivation is nowadays, I think, bigger and bigger, more and more. Motivation becomes a critical factor in work in general, as you know, as some of the stuff gets automated and we're getting more high-level abstract tasks as humans, then motivation becomes even more important. Listening and open dialogue is key. Yeah, you can see similar things popping up all the time. Thank you, thank you. Keep on writing them there and we will put them together. I thought about giving an example of maybe this thinking going into practice. And this example is already kind of giving you an idea what's the final exercise for this whole course we're going to ask you to do. So, by the end of today, I'm going to give you the final exercise for pair work. And that is, of course, the last exercise of the course because next week, Wednesday, it's the last lecture and no exercises after that. So let's see, what do you think? My example here I took is introducing design thinking to non-designers. And I put a little bit context into it. So what if I just have one sprint, like 5 days, or one workshop to introduce design thinking to an audience that doesn't identify themselves as designers? And why I use this example is because I have been in this situation quite many times. And I kind of get this feeling that this has not still gone away, that we have a lot of people who could benefit from design thinking. And the little footnote here is that in my experience, actually, it's much more easier to introduce design to non-designers than introducing design to professional designers. And that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek there because designers have very strong opinions about design and non-designers necessarily don't. However, we do have these, what I called earlier about allergies. And it's another discussion of where do these allergies come from? But, I don't know, maybe you have bumped into some of these, that you use some key word and people get an allergic reaction, just like this little dog over here, that if you say, let's say, the word agile, and then people go like, I'm not a developer. This doesn't involve me. I will not listen. Agile is something that comes from software engineering. Not my cup of tea. Or maybe you say the word business, and then you have people go, it's just business thing, numbers, not my thing. I don't understand numbers. I'm not a business person. It's not my thing. Not my cup of tea. Or like I kind of indicated, you say the word design, and people go like, well, I'm not a designer. No, doesn't, I don't care. I won't listen. So how do you actually then start facilitating, for example, design thinking if you can't use the D word? If the D word starts an allergic reaction, or let's put it another way, surfaces people's prejudices, then as a facilitator, you should be aware of that. And that's pretty much the solution here I'm going to present to you, is that how do you introduce design thinking without using the D word, which becomes a fun exercise for anybody who is either a design professional or not. What is actually design thinking if you can't say that design is design? And again, I've been many times in a situation where actually very good professional designers can't really define design easily without saying that, well, design is about design, or design is about design thinking, and design thinking is about how do you think about design. That's a bit of a circular there. But of course, I guess more or less we can agree that there are some aspects in design thinking where you don't use the D word, such as, looking at the customer perspective, understanding there's probably business involved, there's probably some technology involved, definitely creativeness, playfulness. It's very visual, co-creation, collaboration play a role. It's very problem-driven, can be solution-driven, cross-disciplinary, iterative, and so forth. So kind of in my example, if you are in a situation, how do you introduce design thinking to non-designers? Don't start with the design thinking. Or, if you need to introduce agile, don't start with that. Don't start with the school of thought, maybe. Especially if you have recognized that people have a lot of prejudice towards these, or people are not that interested to go outside their own boxes of thinking. But the answer is, so how do you introduce design thinking to people so in their own terms? So of course, the first question to you is to calibrate your own thinking. If you think design, agile, lean startup is something that these people would really benefit from, then what do you think is the people's problem worth solving? Why do you think design would benefit these people? What is the problem that design would be the right medicine to help them? So the first step in my sprint example would be, after you have kind of thought about, okay, I think this is why design thinking would be good for them, then kind of do the same thing for them as well. Clarify their own objectives together with them. Kind of go like, okay, what is your job like? What are your strategic goals? What does your team try to achieve? What's the problem we are solving for ourselves? So rather than you just coming up with the answer that this is the problem for them, start by it, workshop with them, ask them. And then don't make it an exercise. Make, again, keyword accountability here. When you're asking people that, okay, what is the actual challenges that you're dealing with in your team? Or what do you see as the most important strategic goals? And what are the biggest problems for you not reaching these goals? You want answers, and you want good quality answers, so you want accountability. So how do you make it kind of real? How do you make it, in this part, it might be very easy for people to go like, well, this is actually our real problem. Well, this is actually our business problem. So making sure people really understand the challenge. And the little picture and the quote here is something I have bumped into in my experience, is that I actually did this kind of a thing for a company, very engineering oriented company. And afterwards, one of the engineers said that, well, Risto, I always thought that this design stuff is this blah, 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 soft design, kids playing with watercolors. But now I can see that this is actually hard business. And I was very happy for that comment. So people have a lot of prejudice when it comes to design, that it maybe looks like that kid working with whatever colors there. So let's not start with that. Let's start with their own hard business or technology or whatever problems they have. That was step number one. Step number two, kind of, you can see this resonates with something I talked earlier. Bring in the reality. So a really important part about design thinking is customer centricity. That's bringing some real people, literally. Introduce them to customers, introduce them to users. Get a real customer, get a real end user into the room, and then facilitate the people to have a conversation with them. Who is this person? Where do they come from? What do they do? How do they use our services at the moment? What are their problems worth solving? And so forth. And keeping in mind this empathy. Empathy is difficult, but actually we as people are actually really good when at social interactions, more or less. So when you're bringing that real people into the room, I would say empathy becomes much easier. People are polite. People are nice. You're trying to understand the other person. You're trying to figure it out and all of that. Uh, and then start also listening about maybe some of the prejudice people have, just like I said earlier, the B2B, B2C prejudice, because it's actually very easy for professionals not to go and talk with customers. That's super easy. So of course, your solution would be just make them talk with the customers and have those interviews. And actually, it solves a lot of things. Now they have a real person somewhere who is a real customer. So once that was step number two. So once step number one, you have clarified what are their objectives, their goals in their own words. Step number two, who are these customers? What do they look like? Do they have a first name, last name? What do they say are their problems? What do these real people consider valuable? So you got these two things. And now you let them kind of be creative. Now you bring the watercolors. And then you kind of go like, hey, what up? Play with these. And typically at this stage, people are actually very excited. Meeting real people, meeting real customers typically energizes people. It is fun. It is great. Meet a person and, it's fun to talk with. And that's why you kind of let them taste the creativity. Don't give any real world or real business objectives yet. Go like, hey, what would you think? Let's say that, it was Christian. So Christian was this person you just talked with. What would Christian want? What would they use? What would help their lives? Use role plays, mock-ups, make it a game, make it a play, make it non-serious. And then you can start seeing different kind of problems that people have. Do they have their own mindset? Once you put them into action, into designing solutions or into coming up with solutions, then you can start spotting maybe in the teamwork or in the individuals that are they actually solving problems or are they just actually doing what is told or what is doing what is expected? Do they go like, I don't know what to do, teacher, tell me what to do, or are they actively just solving problems? How do they work in a team? How's the dynamics? You know, uh, then to the safety and the risk taking that came from Hugo, your comments. Who's making the decisions? Is everybody looking at the big boss? Is there kind of this culture or feeling that everybody has the safety to say their opinions and all of this? Do they have the courage to take one solution and then maybe change it and pivot to another solution? These things start popping up. And then the energy levels and the creativity. These require typically energy. If they have never done some of these things before, you should be mindful and help them with this, thinking outside the box, coming up with ideas, coming up maybe with crazy ideas. Maybe you just schedule one night of sleep in between so that you're not just asking too much on a one sitting and so forth and so forth. So get them taste the creativity, make them play, keep it non-serious, but be very mindful and very aware, your antennas open about how do the dynamics work and how does that kind of the meta level go. And then maybe after one night of sleep, if this is more than a one-day workshop, bring them back. Don't lose the energy. Don't lose the inspiration. Don't lose the fun. Don't, if they're laughing, their butts off, try to keep that thing going. And then you just go like, hey, this was actually the warm-up. And now let's go back to your original problems, your own business problems, and your real customer data. And let's use this same energy, this same, laughter, these same tools, this same teamwork into the real problems. And this actually often works. Then they go like, oh, okay. So we can actually brainstorm, or, we can actually do role playing, or we can do this, or we can do that. And then, of course, the whole point about this might be the reflection, the thinking. Hold on to the initiative. Maybe it was a workshop. Maybe it was a 3-day, 5-day sprint. And they had the luxury to be in this strange parallel universe where they can use different methods and meet real customers and come up with new different kinds of solutions. So how do you hold on? How do you help them to hold on to the initiative? How do you help to create the kind of safe accountability, if you will? So everything you gotta ask them in the workshop to do, show them that it is actually beneficial after the workshop. How do you keep them motivated to keep on going? And then, of course, make it a reality show. Maybe they need to present the final results to the broader audience, to their colleagues, to other teams, to a steering group. Uh, Celebrate the hard work, give them badges, give them stickers, give them study credits, whatever kind of rewards that this was actually done, appreciate their effort, appreciate that it probably was not that easy for them in a work context. Follow up maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, like, hey, remember 2 weeks ago we had that workshop? What do you think? What happened? Did you change anything? What do you think about it now? What did you learn? And then give those tools. If you use them tools, give them to them. Whether it's an A4 or a PDF or maybe a little booklet, have them ready, give them, go like, hey, what's stopping you from using these for real? How do you introduce this to your team when you go back after this parallel universe you were just in? And maybe last but not least, maybe just ask them to promise one thing after the workshop, the last hour, everybody go around the room. Okay, what do you promise to do differently next week? What do you promise? What do you promise? And then you got already the follow-up. You would go like, hey, you know what? You promised to do this. How did it go? Did you actually do this? Accountability. And then maybe the final step. You can go and everybody's going, hey, this was a good workshop or it was a good sprint. Yeah, this really, made me think again. You can go like, hey, by the way, guys, some people call this design thinking. And there's this whole new world about books and tools and literature with the D word in it. And, start using it. Now you know it. But now it is their design thinking. It's not like you just brought this pile of books and said, learn this. This is good for you. But it's kind of like it's coming from their goals, their objectives. They have gone through the experience. And now they can go like, okay, so I got this new fire within me and I can look into different literature and start, fueling that fire. So to summarize, my little example is this, that just 5 steps. Make them write down their own business objectives. This is a super good little facilitation trick, which is so good. It brings accountability, And also for you, it's, you can see what's their world like. Then bring in the real customers, let them taste the creativity, turn their energy into the original task, into the real world, help them go to this parallel universe where they can play and laugh. And once they have the experience, that one, try to bring it back to the real world. And go like, hey, why don't you just laugh in your real job as well? Why don't you use these tools in your real job as well? And then you kind of help them to make it their own. After this workshop, make it their own. How would you adapt this? What do you promise to do next? So, and how does this fit into what I talked about in the beginning of this lecture is the point that the thing is for you as a facilitator and for the part, you kind of zoom out. You zoom out beyond the individual tools, the individual methods, the individual school of design thinking. And once you kind of zoom out and you start understanding the context, who are these audiences? Where do they come from? What do they believe in? What does it say in their business cards? And what are the tools I want to use? What are these tools good for? And then you start making this puzzle together. And that's how you actually can start, for example, introducing design thinking without saying the D word at all. Good. Any comments here? Praise without a pay rise is shit. Some people say that. Problematic. Yes, but still, acknowledgement and rewards are good as well. It doesn't have to always be money. But maybe the pay, your salary should probably correlate with the power, which should correlate with the accountability asked from you. I think I take that from that comment as well. Okay, that was my example. I am ready to introduce you the final exercise unless somebody wants to comment something about this fast recipe of mine of 5 steps. Well, feel free to comment in the chat. I will keep my eyes open and will respond to that as well. Because the final exercise we're asking you to do is kind of the grand finale of this course is to, why don't you design a workshop with everything you have done now, everything you have learned? Let's put it all together and design a workshop. And by the end of next Monday, it would be nice to have all of these so we can kind of go over them again and maybe highlight some of the things and the good stuff you're doing. So again, you're going to have a pair, so two people. Person A goes like, oh, I need to design a workshop, and the person B is the facilitator going like, sure, I'll help you. And now we're going to put a lot of things together. So I'm going to have a lot of slides. It doesn't mean that this has to be a heavy exercise. But having said that, I think this exercise is perhaps requires slightly more work than the previous ones. Hard to say, but it's not a light exercise either because we're putting a lot of things together. So remember this, we're asking you to design a workshop. So let's start with the temporal stuff. Kind of, what do you think needs to be happen before the workshop? What do you think that should happen after the workshop? So don't just design the workshop, design what needs to happen before, and also design what needs to happen afterwards. What's the desired impact? Remember, 1 month after the workshop, 3 months, 6 months after the workshop, 200 years after the workshop. Well, maybe that's a bit far, but I don't know your context. And we've had all these sparring questions again. This is a long list. Don't be afraid of it, but this is just to give you an idea. What kind of questions you facilitating the other person who's designing the workshop, what kind of sparring questions can you ask about what needs to be done before? What's the illness? Why this workshop? If this workshop is the medicine, what is the illness you're trying to cure? So forth. Why do you want? What is the investment people want? All of these questions. Who's taking part? Why are these people taking part? Do you have enough decision makers? Do you have enough expertise in it? So again, these are questions you can ask even without knowing much about the other person's context. And I put this quote there in the end. Life is too short to be facilitating work that has nowhere to go. So let's be prepared. And then, of course, you need to plan what happens during the workshop. So here's just an example to you, kind of maybe 5-day workshop. This is actually a framework I used once and copy pasted here. Just how would I go? I would have like 5 days, 5 topics. First day, setting, what are the people's goals? Second day, all about customer. Third day, all about value proposition. Fourth day, about prototyping experiments. Fifth day, wrapping it up and going forward. Choosing methods for each and, thinking about maybe risks. And a lot of sparring questions again for you. Principles are important, but, don't overlook the simple practicalities. How many hours? How many breaks? What is the objective? What do they expect? Are you going to be lecturing them or are you going to be workshopping? Is it going to be more about them doing stuff or more about them sharing their opinions? Or is it going to be pulling? Is it going to be pushing and so on? And based on this, you can go into the details. What are the schedules? What are the breaks? Where are they going to get food? Are you going to go to have coffee there? What are the methods? What are the tools? What does the room look like? Do you need chairs? Do you need tables? Do you need pencils? And so forth and so forth. And then just added here, Jari's checklist when he talked about facilitation, a couple of questions, sensitivity. Should you be prepared about these? How are you going to, be mindful of all of these things, or which maybe not all of these? Which ones do you think in your situation are things that you should be mindful? And then, of course, afterwards. Plan the afterwards. Plan what happens afterwards. How will you know if the workshop has actually been meaningful? How do you know that it has actually reached the impact that you wanted? How do you know if it was an ideation workshop? How do you know that if they have changed or what has happened to them? Because at the end of the day, the workshop should serve a bigger cause, not just a workshop for its own sake. So that's pretty much the exercise. Again, both of you are going to be, split your time in half. And the first half, person A helps person B. Second half, person B helps person A. So for those people, for all of you who are doing the exercise, so you need to come up with some kind of a meaningful workshop in whatever context you find useful. Maybe it's your workplace, maybe it's your hobby, maybe it's your studies, maybe it is something you did before, but just have some material to work with. And then the other person is going to be sparring you and facilitating and helping you to design a good workshop. And then you switch roles. Good. And then, of course, we still had a few people who had forgot to put the reflections in the assignments. The reflections are where you learn, and that's why we are so very interested in about your learnings, your thoughts, your reflections about this. And now you can definitely reflect about the whole facilitation thing. What did you learn about yourself as a facilitator when you were helping the other person? And what did you learn about yourself being facilitated? Are you a good person to be facilitated? How does it feel? How does it all that? So good. This is actually the next slide is about this. Discuss the learnings. I'm suggesting here that maybe after you have done the exercise, maybe a few minutes alone in quiet, write some bullet points, and then have a conversation with your pair and share your reflections. Write them in the text and add them into the submission. Good. Jaakko will send the participation list soon, and I'm actually done here. That was lecture 5 out of 6. We are definitely more past the halfway mark. One more lecture to go. Next week, we're wrapping it up. A few words about meta skills, or a few words about the world in general when it comes to future of jobs and facilitation. But don't leave yet. Remember to mark the participation. The link is now in the chat. And then super importantly, everybody pay attention. Not the tourists. You don't have to pay attention. But everybody who wants any credits out of this, we're going to be closing shop on June 11th. We're going to be done and dusted and going to go out to have whatever summer activities we're going to do. So after that, June 11th, it will be very difficult to reach us. Believe me, I have empirical evidence from past years that trying to reach us after we have closed this course is difficult. So please, please, please try to get all your questions and everything done by June 11th. June 11th is the ultimate deadline for you to send anything and everything. So if you have missed any exercises, or you have any questions, or if you have any late submissions before June 11th. And Annika and Jaakko will be there all the way until June 11th to help. And then we're going to put things together, give the grades to everybody or give all the grades to everybody and so forth. Further readings about today actually are links to different kind of tools. And there's this one link here that actually this was when we started this course, when it was still COVID. We got together some companies who gave away their tools as well. So a lot of tools over there. Key takeaways here in a text about the whole lecture. So if you missed or you didn't pay attention, it's all here in one slide. Your checklist before we go, attendance form, slides, everything's going to be in the Google Drive. That's going to come in the email. Annika Jaakko will send you an email for the final exercise with your pairs. Any questions, send an email or ask now. We are 7 minutes prior closing. Oh my God. Where's Jari? That's Jari missing. Jari would have been 7 minutes. Oh, well, enjoy the extra time.